A stand-up is like doing a puzzle every day. You can't get bored because you're constantly, putting it together in a different way. It's frustrating. You can sit down and write for 2 hours. I'll try and do half an hour minimum a day. And I look at that as like it's accumulative, just kind of compounds. But I think in terms of, what you said, how it impacts on other areas of my life or how I feel about that, I've never looked at stand-up and thought, one day I'll retire. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily look at it as being like George Carlin and doing stand-up way into my 70s. But I think stand-up the path that I'm on, I feel like when I'm in my kind of retirement years, I'll still be doing something that is involved with either writing or producing, things like that.
For me, it's Japanese, call it Ikigai. You always have a life of purpose. Don Rickles is one of my favorite comedians of all time. And I saw him a couple years before he died out here in Austin. And I was like, yeah, you know what? That's what I would love. I would love to die on stage like Dick Shawn. All right, I'm here with Harry Stachini, and we're talking in the pregame, and we're going over he's done stand-up, all over the UK and Dubai. And we're talking about the differences between, United States and Great Britain. And, then we were start talking about, reps, kind of, how much reps you need as a comedian, how often you need to go up.
Yeah, 100%, yeah.
Before I logged on with you, I was watching some stand-up that you did in 2017. And then I watched you know where I'm going to go. And then I watched some stand-up that you did in December. And your crowd work, first of all, I will say the routine I saw in 2017, it was a little, you could tell that you're so free flowing in December compared to 2017, right?
Yeah, I imagine.
And I'm getting somewhere with this. But the thing is that you did have a sense of what it seemed like even back then, you did your premise, you had a joke, and then you had a tag and a tag and a tag. It seemed like there was structured. So before we, get into your origin and all that and how you started, I want to know, do you have a formal writing process? Even just 2017, did you have a formal writing process, or was it just inherent? Like, look, I just think I'm doing what was a formal writing process, or what was it like?
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I suppose for me, I will, when people say what I am on stage, it's like relatable storytelling and stuff like that. But comedy for me has to be personal. So, like when I was younger, I remember watching like Richard Pryor, from early teens. And what I couldn't wrap my head around was like, this guy he's telling jokes, but he's literally just talking about his life. And that Richard Pryor live in concert, you can watch that now and it still hasn't aged. Like it looks unreal. But it's because the material is so personal. So for me, it was like, right, well, if I do stuff about me, then no one else can do my jokes. It was always like, what's going on? What am I seeing? What am I feeling? But then in terms of getting that right on stage, I'll go up with, I'd say, a rough idea and then try and figure it out as I go along. But, that could take like 6 months before the bit is a bit. But for me, I'm like, I'll go with 3 jokes. And then if I can get 6 after that, and then another 3. And then if I've got 12, I'm like, that's a routine. So I'd rather have a piece of material that's 6 minutes than something that's like, just a line. But that's because that's the type of stand-up I enjoy watching. I want to feel like I'm sat in someone's company, and I might not laugh at everything, but I'm enjoying what they're saying, and then the payoff at the end is worth it. So for someone that does like one-liners, which is not how I think at all, I would switch off. I'd be like, I'd enjoy it, but I'm not getting my teeth into it. I'm not like, I feel like I've got to be on all the time. So for me, it's like, if I can pull people into a world and there be, pauses and stories and all that, it just feels a bit more something I would enjoy. But yeah, I've been trying to get together a new show at the moment, and like above my laptop is just a wall of Post-it notes. So bit by bit.
A lot of comedians do that. They will, and I'm different when I did it. They'll do like half a set written out. And then they'll say, I'm going to leave some opening here, and even at a young career, they'll do that. And they'll say that's their writing process, is where certain comedians are, look, I'm going to set out my full set 5 minutes, but it's my probable show. And then I got to be prepared to pivot just in case I'm in the moment. But some comedians, more often than, I'm finding, so especially in the UK, it seems like a lot of comedians are like, look, I got about, just like you said, I got about 5 jokes. I'm going to go out there and then I'm going to, like, if something happens, I'm going to be prepared to pivot,
Yeah.
and that's where the jokes are going to come, and I'm going to work on that, and I was like, that takes a lot of balls.
Yeah, I think, but then I heard someone say, like, if you're not dying on stage, obviously, like, within reason, but if you're not dying on stage, you're not necessarily trying, because, like, there's like low hanging fruit in every subject, and there's certain things you just like. That's the first thought I've had on that, but the third one will be the better one. So you go with what you got, but like, it's gonna adapt, it's gonna improve, and equally, like, doing it on stage and then someone going, oh, by the way, why don't you try it this way? And you're like, how come I've not thought of that? But I've got friends who are the opposite of me, who go up with a script, you know what I mean? And it's like, it's stand up, but it's like watching, it's so oiled, and even from like the first time they told the joke. As for me, I'd feel quite rigid in that. My style's like quite conversational, albeit it's all one way. But that element of like putting a question to the audience, they're not going to answer it, but you answer it through the funny examples that you've then got. But yeah, it's humbling when you hit a punchline and no one laughs, and you're like, oh, well, I thought that was funny.
Yeah. You got to cop to it. You got to be in the moment and all that. It is the most, I don't think that ever gets old. It's like, shit, you know what? I just don't know how, you have to get a lot of reps in. You have to be going up quite a bit to where you're landing material that's not working for some reason, and not let it affect you as much, because you're like, all right, just another gig. This is just that.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
I think what's interesting as well is like you learn. I think the more you're doing it, the idea of when you first start, it's like, all right, this is my set. This is the beginning. This is the middle. This is the end. And then the more you start shifting that around, and you're like, oh, this bit of material doesn't work as an opening joke because the crowd don't know me well enough. They don't trust me enough. So by having it, there's like a joke in my show that I did at Edinburgh, which had to be at 40 minutes, because if I opened it, you'd be like, whoa, mate, this is too much. But you only kind of learn that by just experimenting with things. But yeah, the idea of going up with a brand new idea and just seeing what happens, it's terrifying. But I think you get used to the idea of going, this will be fine. You know what I mean? I can do the job, but if they don't laugh, they don't laugh.
Let's go back to the beginning. I want to find out, how old were you when you said, you got the notion? It's like, I think, stand up, everybody thinks I'm funny or whatever. That's how it usually starts. I want to how did that start, and where was your first gig, and how old were you when it happened? What was it like?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I like, first time I ever did stand up, I was 18. So I'm 29 now. But that was at a comedy club in Liverpool called Hot Water, which is, it's probably like one of the biggest clubs in the UK now. One of the resident compares there, a guy called Paul Smith, blew up like with crowd work clips online over the past since 2017. But like, he's never done like our TV shows over here, which are like made for stand-up, is like Live at the Apollo. So that'd be like the equivalent of doing like Conan or something like that, I imagine, or Saturday Night Live. Paul had never done Live at the Apollo, but because of these crowd work clips, he was selling out arenas. So it was like he just bypassed all the kind of industry. But when I started, Paul was the MC there, and he was like the mentor on the comedy course that I was doing. So like, really lovely guy, they're personable, and his style was something I was like, I relate to that, because it's you're a heightened version of yourself, but you're not a character. And I'm not any different really on stage as I'm off. It's it's very much just the examples I'm talking about a bit different. But I did that when I was 18. I did like 6 weeks and then did a gig at the end. It was fine, you know what I mean? I did 5 minutes, and I remember being like, it was, after I did it, I was like, right, okay, well, what happens now? And I didn't know. So for about 6 months, I did a gig. So I say like I officially started properly doing stand-up in February 2014. So next month it'll actually be 10 years of me doing it, which is, it feels mad to think like no one does a job now for 10 years. Very rare, many people change paths and that, but I'm like, this is the job. So I did started doing proper gigs like 2014, and obviously making no money, just traveling here, there and everywhere, just getting your name out and just learning, that idea of being uncomfortable and getting it wrong. And then I would say about 4 years in, it was comedy wasn't costing me to do it. It was just a paid hobby. But I would always like look at people and think like, how do you get to that level? And but that idea of reps, you can't substitute that. There's kind of like freak anomalies where there's an actor called Kevin Bridges who Scottish actor, but like amazing comic, sells thousands of tickets. But he started stand up when he was 18, and by the time he was 23, he was doing like massive tours. And that's kind of like a bit of never really happens. So I always thought, right, well, if I do this for 10 years, by the time I get to 30, if I'm not making any money, I'll stop. I think there's all well and good of like, having a bit of tenacity and not giving up. But I've met comics, as you would have met people who are like, the crowd are a bit off, and you're like, they've been like that for 10 years, mate. Like that's not the crowd, that is you.
Right.
But that level of like self-awareness is just being like, we'll give this a go, but let's be measured about it. And then I would say in the last just before the pandemic, I was about to quit my job and do stand-up full time. And then obviously the pandemic came, and I was like, well, that's not happening. So when it started to open up again, I was getting more bits and pieces, and then eventually it just became the job. So 10 years. But that kind of first, picking up a microphone, I was at university and I was bored with my degree. So I thought I'd start doing stand-up, and then it just one thing to another, and so on and so on. But it's interesting. The more you go on, it's like your goals are constantly changing, and the parameters of what you deem to be successful are always changing. But I look at it as like, if I can get to a point where I can tour and make money through podcasting, happy days.
It's easier to make money now through other branches, but before that period, before there was podcasting, and even then, you still have to ask yourself, look, in order for me to be a true athlete, a true comedian, I'm going to need to go up every single night. I'm going to really need to go, if you really want that, it depends on what your goal is, really. Everybody's got their own journey. But most comedians want to be the best they can be,
100%.
So every night, multiple times a night, sometimes depending on what city you're in, and writing every day, depending on, and then certain, and basically not everybody writes every day. What I'm getting at is there's so many reps that you need, so much time plus effort in order for you to go to that next level of, now it's paying for itself. Now it's paying for my career. Now, how well do I want my career to be? And then you're saying, a wife and kids or whatever, a significant other, and, other than my dog, I don't know, I'm going to have to make that choice. I mean, have you reconciled that, how did you navigate that?
At the moment, I'm not in a relationship. I was with someone for 8.5 years, and I was one of the things we just kind of grew apart. But I think how I look at it going forward, like by the time I'm 35, I'd love to be in a position where kind of touring is something I'm doing every 18 months, right? And you're picking and choosing the kind of gigs you're doing a bit more. And you've got more flexibility, because that idea of being present if I had a kid, or, being able to go away with the family, stuff like that, just having flexibility, the idea of being tied down to a gig that you need to do because of the money, for me feels like, counterproductive. So I suppose looking forward, I'm like, if I can stack the odds as much in my favor in the next kind of, 5 years, then hopefully I'll buy a little bit more leeway for myself, and then that will extend again in another 5 years. But I totally understand the idea of the amount of sacrifice you'd make, and also having someone that's understanding of that, because like some people get it, like that's your job, you're out Thursday, Friday, Saturday gigging, and you might be doing new material. I'm probably out 4 times a week, either podcasting or gigging and stuff like that, and that works for me. But if I was at home all the time, I think I'd be going nuts. So I think I'd like to have a partner that was similar to me in that sense, like had their own thing going on. But it definitely does take a patient person to be with anyone that's kind of doing a job that isn't 9 to 5, regardless of being a comedian or an actor or whatever. And And I don't know how you kind of find it, obviously, with doing your podcast and stuff. A lot of comedy is very solo. You know what I mean? You spend a lot of time on your own, and I'm very comfortable with that. I quite enjoy my own space. But when you're kind of coming up with stuff, if you need that space and you need someone around you that can respect that. But equally, the pool of them people is probably less common than it being the other way around.
Right. The pool of the career of a stand-up comedian is like a hurricane. You're spinning, and the faster you spin and the more you're involved in your own thing, the better you're going to get. But in order to have somebody else come in, they're going to have to spin with you. And it's crazy in there, and they're going to have to be okay with that hurricane, and it just seems like, an interesting thing to navigate. I was talking to another comedian out here in Texas, and he was, I said, you're starting to really pick up your career, starting to take off, you get more gigs. I see, your Instagram's growing. I said, it looks really good. I said, what about this? And I asked him that same question. And I said, are you in love with, hotels and planes and traveling? Because that's like 50% of being a comedian is hotels and planes. And he's like, that's the dream, man. And I was like, I get it. Yeah. Right. You know what? That's your dream. So you got to make that choice, because he's a hurricane.
No, that's a good way of looking at it. I think sometimes it's better to know what you don't want, and then you can narrow down to what you do want, and I think my auntie was a comic for a long time. She was in a double act a while ago, and was respected, and they did well and all the rest of it. But because of circumstances outside of their control, being like credit crunch, and there was a so in like the UK there used to be a club called Jongleurs, which was like the big weekend club. The gigs were full of like almost like hen parties, so like stag do's, you know what I mean, like a bachelor party.
Yeah.
So quite like, and but they were gigs and they paid really well. So you could do, like a weekend of them, and you'd be making like a few £1,000s a weekend. But they were everywhere, and that was when it was like kind of the heyday of less comedians, more gigs. So yeah, they were gigging. Credit crunch came. All these venues kind of shut down. Comedians were owed thousands and basically just told, do one, like you're not getting your money. And they had to pivot, and they ended up just moving away from stand-up and got into filmmaking. And that's 2008. So to the point where they are now, they've now got like 30 employees. They make films in Africa and all the rest of it, all over the place. And it's like I look at them and I think I respect how you're able to pivot in situations and not hold on to it in like a bitter way. And I think for me, the idea of not wanting to go down the route of becoming bitter is pushes me more towards what I do want. Because I don't know, you might have met comics who they just seem like the spark's gone, or the fun's not there. So I'm a bit like, why are you doing it? No one's asking you to do stand-up. It's a job that you're constantly carving out yourself. But I suppose there's some people can just run out of things to chase, and that doesn't look very meaningful to me.
Yeah, my whole philosophy on that, it's I guess kind of what you're talking about is Anthony Jeselnik. You know Anthony Jeselnik?
Yeah.
So he says, I got into stand-up because I don't want to listen to anybody. I just want to be, just do whatever I want. The old saying is, if you're like super wealthy and wealthy in the sense of the stand-up community, do what I want, whenever I want, how I want, whatever the fuck I want. So I guess that was the same thing with me. I was like, you want to make people laugh because that's what you've done your whole life. And then it's like that kind of job. You could do whatever you want, but then you need, in this day and age, modern times, you need, currency. So, you get, I started to do, I wanted to be an actor and a filmmaker. I said, you know what? I gravitate toward filmmaking because as an actor, you can't really do what you want. You're just you're like a plebeian, and with stand up, you could just do it whenever you grab that microphone, you could start talking. And then that's kind of like what, the first thing I ever wrote was stand up. And then that helped me with, my business, because when it came time to do a business, because being an entrepreneur was like an easy choice because you do whatever you want, within respect, and I think it's the freedom of a comedian. Do you like, sometimes, find that 8.5 years in a relationship, it's really, there's a good run, but do you find it's like, when you're a stand-up comedian or whatever, you're not confined towards, but you also have, also work in the workplace. So you're dealing with, you're getting reps in with a boss. Do you find though, like, sometimes being a comedian, dealing with, when you work somewhere, when you did work somewhere, or a relationship, you're like, fuck it. It's like you're so used to just writing the script the way you want and just doing what you want. Was that a challenge for you after a while? Was for me.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I'm not a tyrant by any stretch. You know what I mean? It's not like it's my way.
Right. No, I think, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, no. But I think I definitely enjoy having freedom, of what I'm doing, and stand up does provide that 100%. And also, there's a huge amount of stand up that's outside of your control. Like, I think what's kind of interesting is there's comics I know who are like absolutely unreal, and they're not on television, and they've not got massive followings, but like I watch them in clubs on a Friday, Saturday, and they destroy, you know what I mean? But because they're not known to the wider audience, and I think the general perception from the public is like, oh, if you're funny, it will just happen. And it's like, I don't say this in a way to sound like negative. I think it's just, it doesn't really matter how funny you are. There are so many things outside of your control, and the only thing you can control is writing shows and telling jokes. You know what I mean? And that is something which you need a bit of luck along the way and all the rest of it. But for me, just focusing on that kind of makes everything else in life feel a lot more manageable. Because like, getting into a relationship with someone, people are complex. You could have a job for 30 years and then get made redundant, and you're like, well, I've just given 30 years to that, and I'm like, things are very transient, a stand-up is like, I equate it to like doing a puzzle every day. And you can't get bored because you're constantly putting it together in a different way. It's frustrating. You can sit down and write for 2 hours. I'll try and do half an hour minimum a day. And I look at that as like, it's accumulative, just kind of compounds. But some days you sit there for an hour and you're like, this is absolute shite. This is horrendous. But you have to go through the process of doing it. But I think in terms of, what you said, how it impacts on other areas of my life or how I feel about that. I've never looked at stand-up and thought, one day I'll retire. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily look at it as being like George Carlin and doing stand-up way into my 70s. But I think stand-up the path that I'm on, I feel like when I'm in my kind of retirement years, I'll still be doing something that is involved with either writing or producing, things like that. Like, whereas my other friends who have like kind of, no disrespect to them, but 9-to-5 type jobs, the path for them is like, retirement is we just stop and then I kind of have my time. As like, I feel like I'm having my time now, and I kind of want that to maintain forever. Like, how do you look at it for yourself when you think of your own businesses? Are you like, I want to get to a point where we just stop and then I can do what I want? Or I know it's different with different people, so it's.
For me, it's Japanese call it Ikigai. You always have a life of purpose. So to me, I mean, Don Rickles is one of my, he's right back there, a picture of him. He's one of my favorite comedians of all time. And I saw him a couple of years before he died out here in Austin. And I said, he wheeled him out there with Regis Philbin to interview him, doing that kind of like a stand-up kind of version of that. And I was like, yeah, you know what? That's what I would love. I would love to die on stage like Dick Shawn, and I don't do stand-up. I'm not a stand-up comedian right now. I'm an entrepreneur. But I've always done it since I'm 19, off and on, and I go back and I'll go back, And I always do the same shit every time. It's like, this is taking a lot of time. This is eating up a lot of my time. I could be like, doing X, Y, and Z, but it's something that you just have to do. So I don't look at it as a time. I look at it as like more of a way of life. Like, and I always use this as an example, like Kane from Kung Fu, the show from the 70s where he's a martial artist wandering the earth, just searching, And I was going to give you the other flip side of that real quick on the comedians on there. I think they're some of the best people. And I'll tell you why. Because in order to come up as a comedian, you have to analyze human nature. You have to deal with a bunch of people that you have to really, on moment to moment, you're dealing with rapport and communication, and all that makes for a better human being. So I'd say comedians, some of them are really fucked up because they're fucked up to begin with. But I mean, some of them are the best people on planet Earth because they're out there every day analyzing and going through human nature at such a fast clip and a succession of data that goes, that's all they do. So I think some, comedians are some of the best well-rounded people on planet Earth as well.
Yeah, you're definitely right about some nutcases though. Like that is 100% the case. But yeah, I speak to my auntie, who, as I say, was a comic for like 10 years, and they did like really well. But obviously, like in any industry, there's a bit of a bottleneck, and they just didn't get through the bottleneck, But there was lots of people that they were thought fondly of and worked with. That people like Michael McIntyre, Mickey Flanagan, Sarah Millican, like these people who sell thousands of tickets now and like household names. But yeah, like it doesn't matter necessarily how funny you are at times. It's just you might be the right person at the right time in the right place and bang you through. But like what I admire about them is that they weren't jaded or bitter about things. They just work hard and be nice. But that kind of experience they've had as stand-ups now when they're doing their business, they'll say like, we've got a gear that most of our clients don't have when we're in meetings. And they say that element of rapport, like, People buy from people work from people. And if you can work 120 people in a room, the chances of you working a boardroom with 6 or 7 people and you need something out of them, you're going to do it. I've had jobs in sales where I'm like, this is doable. Like, I think, and that's not like an arrogant thing. But I always think if comedy got to the point where I was like, this is absolutely just not working, I could go and get another job. Like, I'm competent, you know what I mean? Right. I'm not an absolute moron, but I just look at them other jobs and I'm like, that it's not worth the squeeze. Like, I'm not interested enough. The puzzle element of it is like stagnant. So I'm like, no, I'd rather have less certainty and do this than have absolute certainty. And it's like safety over happiness. Like, I think a lot of people forego happiness for safety.
Right.
And I don't mean it's like a constant element of happiness, but that idea of like, oh, this is secure, I'll just stay here. And then you're kind of surviving and not necessarily like thriving in a way. I feel like these are signs that would go up around your house, is what I'm saying. But you know what I mean?
On your point though, sometimes you have to be very Zen-like in that part of your career where you're rolling, but you're not really hitting big and selling out the big arenas yet, but you're killing the small rooms. And it's just, your social's taking a little longer to get up there to make sure you get those more gay, and all that's, you're not hitting critical mass yet, but you need to keep on showing up. So you sometimes you work really hard to put yourself in a lucky situation. Right. It's not luck, but you worked really hard. So when that happens, the possibility or the probability that it's more likely.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know did you see a clip earlier it was late last year of a guy doing a slow-mo goal celebration. You see that?
No.
So it's a comedian called Kyle Porter, who's a mate of mine. And
I have seen it. I've seen it. Oh my God, that is so good. I just clicked on. Yeah. Go on about that.
So, Carl. Carl's like, I've known him for years. He lives up the road from me, and we've done loads of gigs together. But he put that clip out, and I was texting him when it was happening, like real time. And his socials went from like 1,600 people to I think it was like 70,000 in the space of like 24 hours. And now I think he's sitting at, when I last checked, it was like 380,000 people. I'll just have a look now. But Carl, that clip blew him up, and it put him. So he's at 368,000 people, and that clip has blown him up to the point where he was doing 10, 15-minute spots on bills, to now doing like his own show and selling 300 tickets in a room. And that's what I mean about like some things can pop and you just bypass, but you never know where that's going to happen. And it might never happen, but at the same time, if you stop trying, it's never going to happen. So you constantly just filtering bits and pieces out. But Carl's in a position now where, I'm not speaking for him in this way, but he's building up to doing a show, and getting to a point where he can do like an hour and 15 on stage. And then if he sells to 10% of that audience every 18 months, the lifestyle that I'll give him is very comfortable. And you think he looks at it as a career, like he works hard and he's gigging all the time. But that joke, that piece of material where he's miming it out, he was doing that for like a year or so, and people are loving it. But that one clip goes 45 million views, and he's, you know, appearing on like Brazilian news shows and all the rest of it. And it's like, he lives, you know, he's from Salford. Like it's mad.
He just went from like 0 to 60 because of that.
It's insane. But that's like social media. Whereas 15 years ago, you were waiting for gatekeepers and all the rest of it. You know, there's a couple of guys who have a podcast in the UK called Have a Word, and Adam Rowe, Dan Nightingale. Dan Nightingale is one of the best acts to ever come out of like the British comedy scene. He's got a special on YouTube, which I'd recommend. It's just called Dan Nightingale Special. It's just come out, but it's so good. But they started a podcast, and that was 4 years ago. It's got 26,000 Patreons, and yeah, they're printing money, that thing. But that podcast, once that started in the UK, it broke the door through for everyone else to be like, oh, this can work, you know, because it feels like in America, I think the Americans are streets ahead anyway when it comes to like stand up, and you know, you guys, you cover the ground better when you're on stage. It translates more worldwide. I resonate more with American stand-up. I enjoy it more than British. But, you know, I can't think of a single British comic that has gone to America and broke America. Whereas, you know, I look at, like, everybody, there's people over here who love Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, like Bill Burr is one of my all-time favorites. You know, Louis C.K., funny guy, obviously, you know, a bit troublesome in parts, but funny guy.
So good. Such a good writer.
But that's what I mean. It's like that stuff translates, but there's certain, like, does my accent sound very regional to, like, how does it sound to you, the way I talk?
Sounds fucking great. I love it. And it works too. And your crowd work too. You're like, oh fuck, you know, like the way you get in there, you know, and it's great, you know. But you on that note though, it really doesn't matter what the accent is, whatever. What you've done is you've done enough, you know, and you found the algorithm for yourself to get to the point where you're the guy at the party that can now take that and isolate that and put that on stage. That's it.
Yeah. And hopefully, you know, in time, like social media and stuff like that, you just compounds, and then you get to a point where if you've got 100,000 eyes on you, you don't need to sell 100,000 tickets, just 10%, you know, that's 10,000 tickets. And then, you know, you sell that every 18 months, you're making a decent bit of bank.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's the thing. I think it all feels like quite manageable and possible. It's the way, it depends on what you want as well. Other people are like, I want to do arenas. I'm like, if someone said to me, you could play 400 seaters for the rest of your life, I'd be like, that sounds great. Anything above that, I'd be like, yeah, this is far beyond what I expected.
Where are you at today? What's going on with you right now? Where are you performing this week, and what's going on with your career? I
suppose what's going on right now. I am just getting ready. I'm getting stuff in place to go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in August again this year.
All right. So where are you at today? What's going on with you this week? What's going on in your career right now? What's topical?
Okay. I suppose right this second, I am putting a plan together to go to the Fringe Festival again in August. I was there last August. I was doing 2 weeks, getting a show ready for a performance I was doing in Manchester. So that was at the end of August last year. We sold a ton of tickets, recorded the show. It was great. But I'm going to go back again this year with that show, but in a bigger room. And then we're doing a live podcast for 2 weeks while we're up there. And then I'll be doing a split show with a couple of other comics, which is like 3 of us doing like 20, 25 minutes a piece, just churning out new jokes. So it's going to be a busy August, but working towards that. I've got the first time I've ever done a cruise ship in April coming up. I've heard horror stories about cruises. Stories.
What have you heard?
Right. So imagine doing stand-up in like a lounge, not even like a theatre, a lounge area, and there's kids running around. It's got to be completely clean. And obviously, like, if you die on your ass, you're on a boat in the middle of the ocean. You can't get off. And like, I've spoken to acts who are like absolute killers in comedy clubs that have had horrible gigs. And, as they're getting off the boat, and it's full of like senior citizens and stuff like that. So, women well into their 80s, like pulling these comics aside as they're getting off the boat, being like, by the way, you were shit. And you're like, yeah, thank you.
So bad.
So, yeah, there's different cruise companies you can go with. I'm not going to say the name of that one, but I'm doing one that's in a theatre. So it's I've spoken to a few comics that have done it, and they said it's 18 plus, anything goes. It's a comedy club. So yeah, I've got that in April, which would be good. But most weeks, I would say 3-4 gigs a week, and it's like weekend comedy clubs. So in the UK, it's like the Frog and Bucket, the Glee, Comedy Store. These are between like 200 to 400 people a show, and they're nice gigs. But that's kind of like your circuit. So yeah, in the immediate, lots of clubs, and then getting the show together for a tour, obviously in Edinburgh. And yeah, we've got a podcast studio which we've just opened and churning out content. So yeah, it's busy, but it could be busier, which would be good. But we just got to work towards it.
And when you're that old guy, what's your plan for that stage of your life?
I think for me, I would still like to be creating something, whether it be some sort of like, I don't see myself stopping stand-up. That's the thing. And I think that idea of wondering what my stand-up's going to be like when I'm in my 40s is quite an exciting thought, because right now it's very relevant to what life is like this second. In the immediate, this is my dad is moving in with me for 3 months in a couple of weeks.
Oh, that's perfect. So much material. You're gonna get so much material out of that.
Exactly. Yeah. So that in itself, I'm like, that'll be cool. See what that kind of looks and feels like. But yeah, I suppose being in my like travel would definitely be up there. Having that flexibility to go to places. I was in Africa in October last year, so there's places like Nepal, India I want to go to. But still being able to like have an element of story to tell. Whether that be through a podcast or interviewing people. Like I really enjoy learning about other people as much as it's nice talking about yourself. People are fascinating. So anything that's creative. But I think the idea of doing stand up in my 70s, I just got no idea what that would look like.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you can imagine. Look at all the old guys having fun. Yeah, just talk about what's going on in your life at that time, and that's no different. You're you're a storyteller, and you're having a good time too. So, tell everybody how they could find out more about you.
Oh, sweet. So I suppose if you've enjoyed, does this come out as video or is it just audio?
Both.
Both. All right. Okay. Cool. I thought, no, I should have dressed more appropriately.
Oh, look fine, lad.
I mean, every time I wear this, my sister says I look like a POW. I'm like,
he's wearing a nice royal blue, navy blue kind of button up, corduroy.
Yeah.
Is that corduroy?
Yeah, it's corduroy. Yeah.
Wow, you're bringing it back.
Yeah, mate. I spilled coffee down it, so I was like, I've got to button this up now. But
he's a fashionable looking guy. For those that are just listening to audio, he's got like the Oliver Peoples looking kind of glasses on. He's got, slender, good looking kid, and he's got the pictures in the background that look fashionable, with the white wall, and these, like spread out part pictures, he's a cool dude, for those guys,
You just need to slip in that this is a rental, just so they don't think I'm doing too well. You
didn't have to say that. Well, okay. It's like you don't know how big your house is or anything, because the background is like, oh yeah, this is just one of the guest rooms.
Yeah, exactly. We're in the West Wing. But I've got my website has like all my stuff on, which is just harrystachini.com. But I'd say I'm trying to push people towards Instagram. My second name's Stachini, which is just difficult to spell for everybody. But on Instagram, it's just Harry Stand Up. I like all my kind of clips, podcasts, tours, and all that go through that. So Instagram's the best place. But I think at the moment we've just got a podcast off the ground, which is called All Made Up, and it's a laugh. It's like 3 hosts, both comics. We get a guest on, and they join us in the writers' room. And then we create a story out of nothing in about half an hour. So they come up with a character, we flesh it out, and then we pick like a start line and an end line. and then we have half an hour to get from A to B. It's good. It's a laugh. People think, how does it work? It's mental, but it does work.
It's a little, improv skit kind of.
Yeah. In a way, yeah. But that's why we're going to Edinburgh with that, because we did it last year, and we had. Do you know Daniel Sloss?
Yeah, and where do I know that name from? Once again, the name. I need to see the face.
Yeah, like big. He's from Scotland, but like Netflix specials and all the rest. We had him on the pod, and it's funny when he came on. He said, "I'd met Daniel a few times, but I don't really know him, But my agent is like good mates with him." And when we arrived, he went. I said, "Thank you very much for doing the podcast, by the way, pal." He said, "Yeah, I'm going to be honest. The only reason I'm here is because your agent has pictures of me doing awful things on his phone." And I was like, amazing. Well, look at that. Blackmail works. But it's good. It's a good time. So I'd say check out the All Made Up podcast, which I'd appreciate. But no, thank you very much for having us on. It's been good.
Yeah. And look at, go to his, Harry's Instagram too. Also, really, tight stand up, great crowd work. He's really just, you're a craftsman at what you're doing. And I appreciate your work too. And it's nice and tight, and you're doing it. You're doing it well. And it's just, it's good, interesting to keep on seeing you grow, and love to see you out here in the States, and just, continue to do what you do. So thank you so much for sharing.
No, cheers, dude. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. Gear up for your next adventure and head over to bolotour.com to check out the amazing Bolo Pack and their other innovative outdoor gear. Catch you next time.